Hi, this is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics. Every other Friday, we partner with author Rebecca Sive for a series we call Vote Her In, about electing our first woman president. If you like this series, you can find it online at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com/voteherin. You can also find these in our regular feed on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, and everywhere you find podcasts. Enjoy! Hi, everyone. This is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics. We are on our 8th episode of the Vote Her In series. I'm here with my partner on this venture, Rebecca Sive. Hi, Rebecca.
Good morning.
And joining us today is a special guest who many of you may know as a Watergate prosecutor and MSNBC contributor, but who also has some really other important roles that we want to discuss on this podcast. So Jill Wine-Banks is with us. Hi, Jill.
Hi, Kelly. Hi, Rebecca.
Hello. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, I got to say, my mom, who does not always listen to the podcast, gets really excited when I have an MSNBC people on. So she was like, "You're going to talk to Jill?" So welcome.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad that people are listening to MSNBC. I just wish more people who listen to Fox would listen and at least get both points of view.
So, Jill, one of the reasons we wanted to talk to you as we're doing this Vote Her In, where we're talking about the movement to elect a woman president, is that one of the really important roles of a president, one that we don't talk about as much, is that of commander-in-chief. And you were the first woman to serve as General Counsel for the Army. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that role and stepping into that as a woman, what that was like and sort of what the world of the military is like.
Well, there's a lot to be said about this topic. At the time that I became General Counsel, which was during the Carter administration, so it's a long time ago, women were just being integrated into the military academies and into basic training. We were also in the process of, for the first time, opening many of the military occupational specialties, which are the basic job classifications in the military, to women. And it was such an interesting time. I really got to watch how the integration happened. I got to watch the performance of women. And more recently, fast forward to in the Obama administration, I served on a commission, Pentagon commission, looking at sexual assault in the military and got to visit a number of bases of all the different services, and to serve on that committee with active duty military, mostly generals, and to see the progress of women. And I just want to point out one or two things that I observed in this more recent time, and that was during the testimony we were taking, one panel of 6 generals came in, actually 5 generals and 1 admiral. And unlike in the days when I was there, where there was the only general until we abolished the Women's Army Corps, which was through legislation during my tenure, their only generals who were female were the head of the Women's Army Corps and the head of the Nursing Corps. That was it. So when these 6 top-ranked officers came in, and all except 1 were female, I almost burst into tears. I was so, I just can't tell you the emotional reaction I had to seeing that progress. And then when I went to the Air Force Academy in Colorado, the superintendent of the academy was also a woman. And these are now 3- and 4-star ranked officers, something that in the old days there was only the 2 positions and they were 1-star positions. So it's really, we've come a long, long way, and it's all really good. The gender of an officer is not the relevant factor. what we learned in the integration process in studying them was it is the intellect and the strength of each candidate, whether they be male or female. And many women outperform the men.
So on this matter of, it being qualifications and perhaps unrelated to gender, and I know, Jill, you and I have spent upwards of a few decades, we agreed with Kelly we wouldn't necessarily dwell on that. But the fact of the matter is that it's, as you point out, there's been such a shift from the Carter era to today. It's also the case that there's a perception issue, and as we've been discussing on Voter In, the issue there is, can a woman be president? And the fear that many people have, we believe unjustifiably, that she doesn't have the skills and the presence and, ideas to lead. And so first and foremost is this idea of being commander-in-chief. And I'm wondering whether you can talk about the kinds of qualities we ought to look for and say that these women have who are running for office, that in fact they are suited to serve as commander-in-chief based on what you saw among, the generals you admired and the other work you did subsequently.
Well, let me first say that one of the things we looked at in trying to make the progress we made was creating gender-neutral qualifications for each job, things that had to be performed. So if you wanted to be a radio operator, you had to carry 100 pounds. That wasn't to discourage women. That was just because that's what the radios then weighed. And if you wanted to be an operator, you had to carry it. And I think the same is true now, where almost all MOSs, military occupational specialties, are open to women. They are open in a way that people with the right qualifications, there are men who can't carry 100 pounds. They can't be a radio operator either. Our current commander-in-chief has no military experience, so military experience certainly is not a disqualification to being president. But having leadership qualities, which both men and women have, are important. I was very impressed. I grew up in the Vietnam era and did not have a favorable opinion of military officers until I got to know them and got to work with them in the Pentagon. And then I saw how smart, how capable, and what good leaders they are. I actually went to both Annapolis and West Point to observe leadership training classes, because having just witnessed the Watergate episode and having seen a total lack of morality and leadership in the White House and among the top aides in the White House, and having seen what I consider to be unbelievable organizational skills and leadership among the military officers I was now working with, I wanted to see whether it was something that could be trained or whether people who got into the academies had those skills to begin with. And my conclusion is, yes, people selected for the academies have very good leadership skills to begin with, but they also are trained. They learn to be leaders by becoming active in leading. And all of the candidates now, both the men and the women, although I have to say I don't know in detail, all 23 of the Democratic candidates have much more leadership capacity than is needed to be president. There is not a single woman in that race who isn't qualified.
And what would you say to people who contest what you say? What would you point to, for instance, in terms of the qualities that Hillary Clinton exhibited in 2016? This is what you ought to look at if you're concerned about who's our next commander-in-chief.
Well, looking at Hillary Clinton in both 2008 and in 2016, and I have the privilege of having gotten to know her through the American Bar Association prior to her running for office. I know how capable she is. I know her intellectual capacity. I know her ability to analyze and do critical thinking, which in today's warfare is much more important than any other capacity. The decisions that generals and the commander-in-chief have to make are really getting information from all kinds of sources, evaluating the accuracy of the reports, making sure you're not being misled by phony information, and making the right decisions. And I saw that in Hillary Clinton. I certainly see it in the candidates who are now running. And I don't think anyone doubted Hillary Clinton's ability to be commander-in-chief. I think there was much more doubt about Donald Trump's ability to be commander-in-chief. So I think maybe we've gotten a little bit past that in terms of women. Now, women are judged by a different standard. I think women are getting less attention in the media in their campaigns right now than the men are getting, and that's unfortunate. I think that things like the criticism of Amy Klobuchar's being a bad boss are things that if her behavior had been done by a man, it would be, well, that's how bosses behave. But because she's a woman, she's criticized for the same behavior that would be acceptable. And, I hate to go back, but when I first joined Jenner & Block as a partner, the first time associates were being evaluated, I did not know any of them because I was brand new at the firm. But I sat in and listened to the evaluation. And I can tell you that I heard gender differences. Men were considered aggressive and assertive. Women were bitches for the same exact behavior. And I think we've come a long way since that time, which was in 1980. But we haven't come all the way, or we wouldn't be hearing the criticisms we're hearing of, for example, Amy Klobuchar.
Or the disproportionate coverage, which has been, it's not just a perception, it's been documented.
Yes, and that was what I was referencing when I said they aren't being fairly covered.
Exactly.
And that, of course, hurts in terms of their credibility. It hurts in terms of their fundraising. So it's not just a minor difference. When I first started practicing law, I was always the only woman in the courtroom. This is in the days before judges were women and defense lawyers were women. And I had to be very careful to make sure that the jury saw me as a credible opponent and as someone they could trust and rely on. And I had to be careful of little behaviors from defense lawyers in the beginning and other lawyers after I went into private practice that were intended to make me look less credible, to demean me in front of a jury. And it could be little things like a man holding my elbow as we approached the bench, which I would, basically poke him in the ribs if he tried, because that's the kind of behavior that makes you look less credible to a jury. And the jury has to accept you as authentic and credible. So the same thing is true for women. And I think that as more and more women become bosses and leaders of men, men will get used to it. As more and more men's wives and children are leaders, they will learn that they have to accept that leadership. And the leadership style can be different. Women don't always lead in the same way that men do. In the military structure, there is a leadership style that is essential because there's no questioning from below. There's no collaboration. It is a top-down structure, and it works. As I say, I came away with a very high degree of respect for military leadership.
So do you think this is a little bit of speculation, but this idea that women are viewed different than men when they're in leadership roles? We're in this sort of unprecedented time right now of executive overreach and collaboration, between the executive and judicial branch that obviously shouldn't be there. Do you think that a woman as president, let's say we do elect one of these women who are running to be the president, do you think that they're going to be judged on sort of a different scale? Looking at their presidency, looking at the kinds of things they're doing. We saw as Secretary of State, how Hillary Clinton was investigated and attacked. And, do you think that same sort of thing is going to happen if we elect a woman president?
Well, the attack on Hillary, I don't think was solely because she was a woman. it was because she was a Democrat, and the Republicans have dropped any pretense of bipartisanship in governing. And they did the same thing to Obama, and I don't think that was because he was not white. He is a male, but I think it was because he was a Democrat, and the Republicans have taken the position of anything they want, they can't have. So, yes, Hillary was attacked, but again, I'm not willing to say that hers was because of gender. I'm also not willing to say that only a woman can represent me. I think there are men who get the women's issues and who can represent me. I think women's voices must be included in the mix in corporations and in government in order to have the kind of equity that is required for good governance and for good profitability in the corporations. But that does not mean that I would necessarily vote for a woman over a man. I will be evaluating the full picture and all the qualifications of any of the candidates.
So, Jill, going to that for a minute, just to probe a little further, one of the things I know I've heard when I've been doing talks about my book, which of course does advocate for electing a woman president as soon as possible, and I know you and I have discussed this, is, one of the most compelling comments I hear when I talk to people, and young girls have said this to me, is, you can't be what you can't see. So while it may be the case that a male candidate and a female candidate share the same policy position or express the same ideas in a decision-making context, it matters that the voice of a woman is heard, that the presence of a woman is seen, that particularly going back to where we started the conversation, in contexts in which it's only been male voices or male presence or a man who has the ultimate authority, say as a general or as a president. So I'm wondering, what weight you give to that notion in, based on your own experience and as you look ahead to 2020.
Well, I've been looking forward to the day that a woman is president for a very long time. And I remember Shirley Chisholm, who said, I look forward to the day when the unqualified women can join the unqualified men in running this government. I actually look forward to the day when the most qualified men and women run the government. And
True that.
There's no question that being a general is not a prerequisite to leading the military. Because if that was true, Donald Trump wouldn't be president. Bill Clinton wouldn't have been president. George W. Bush wouldn't have been president. Yes, a general could be a good president, but most generals are led by people who have not served in the military or certainly have not achieved a general rank. Eisenhower certainly was, but there aren't very many of those around. And I do weigh, if I was in equipoise in deciding between two candidates, being a woman would be a plus in terms of how I would vote. I'm just saying that I'm looking for someone who represents the policies that I think I would like to see enacted, who has the character to stand up to what I consider to be the ridiculous positions of the opposition, and who can be successful. Being able to win this year is crucial. I think that a woman can absolutely win. I think that women will be very motivated to vote for a woman, even though our past history says women were not supportive of Hillary. They were not the biggest advocates for her. So we have to take that into account and say it is the particular candidate who will motivate the voters. And that's very important this year. It is crucial.
Well, the good news, I guess, and we're hoping we talked to Marianne Williamson last week, we're hoping to talk to the others over the course of the year, is that all of these women, at least on the Democratic side to date, are so amazingly well qualified in a variety of, leadership dimensions that we've talked about. So I'm notwithstanding the news of the day, I'm optimistic.
I agree with you completely that the female Democratic candidates are all outstanding. They all have a great deal to offer this country in terms of leadership, in terms of policies, and in terms of being a role model. It would be a wonderful thing to think that that's another glass ceiling that's been broken. It's been a long time coming, and maybe this is the year.
Hear, hear.
All right. Well, Jill, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. This has been a really great conversation, and I really value your experiences and what you bring to this conversation.
Thank you. I'll look forward to continuing the conversation in the future.
The Vote Her In segment is a collaboration of Two Broads Talking Politics and author Rebecca Sive. Our theme song is called Are You Listening off of the album Elephant-Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.